Deep in the valleys of the South Caucasus, the picturesque countryside scenery has a tendency to quickly give way to tragedy and turmoil. Renewed clashes along one of the most sensitive borders in the world brought me back to Azerbaijan, a country that I've come to know more and more over the years. The two rival armies of Azerbaijan and Armenia recently exchanged days of heavy fire outside the city of Tovuz along their northern border. Both sides took casualties.
Azerbaijani soldiers are dug in on the side of a mountain here in trenches that really look like out of a scene from World War I. The cold conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia went hot just a few days ago. The Azerbaijani soldiers here are dug in. They're observing, looking across no man's land, looking for any sign of movement. It's very clear here that tensions remain very high. The fighting could break out again on a moment's notice.
The two countries have been locked in a frozen conflict since they fought a 6-year war following their independence from the Soviet Union. The clashes in Tovuz touched off real concern that they could lead to another full-fledged war.
Ben dövüş başlayan ilk saatlardan, ilk dəqiqələrdən sırf dövüş mövqeyindəyəm. İlk öncə düşmən iri çaplı silahlarından, minatanlardan, digər iri çaplı silahlardan ateşə başladı. 3 gün təxminən şiddətli döyüşlər getdi. Döyüşlər vaxtı mən də döyüşlərdə iştirak elədim. Hansı ki düşmənlə bilavasitə təmas xəttində. Dəfələrlə düşmən təxribat törətməyə, hansı ki bizim torbaqlara keçməyə çalışsalar da onların təxribatının qarşısı qüvvələrimiz tərəfindən alındı və düşmən geri otusturuldu.
The sun-baked valley separating the two sides is filled with minefields, and in the midst of it, an Azerbaijani cemetery. In this conflict, even the dead's final resting place cannot find peace. The Tovuz region gets its name from two of the ancient Turkish tribes that settled here over a millennia ago. The region is one of the Caspian's richest agricultural centers. It even became famous for producing cognac, which at one point supplied the entire Russian market. And as we drove to Tovuz, the Caspian's boundless horizon seemed to meld with its rich blue waters. But the serenity here would soon be brutally shattered.
The destructive aftermath of heavy shelling, like what you see here, pockmarks so many of the homes in this village right outside the Azerbaijani town of Tovuz. But in so many other conflicts that we've seen around the world, it is civilians like those that used to live in these homes that bear the brunt of this type of fighting.
Reminders of the cost of the 3-decade-old conflict are everywhere, and the latest flare-up in fighting has ignited bitter memories. Memorials to the fallen serve as a testimony to the pain of the living.
Происходит где-то там, как всегда, армяне всегда нападают. Когда мы стоим, они нападают. А мы всегда слушали всех хотели мировую дружбу, и поэтому хотели мир это обсуждал. Поэтому всегда сидим, ждем. А мы видим, они гуляют, там, их и солдаты, они гуляют, просто так гуляют. Мы можем их стрелять. Они на наших землях находятся, а мы не делаем это. А как они спокойно стоят, они просто так приходят, начинают наших убивать. Не только здесь. Везде, где граница есть, там они стреляют. По-моему, они специально так делают, что мы их убили, чтобы злой стали, их убили. Убивать, мой брат убивает, детей убивает, мирных людей убивает, потом начинают они плакать, что помогите нас, это наша земля, это азербайджанская земля.
The renewed fighting with Armenia came less than a week after Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev strongly criticized the diplomatic negotiations with Armenia, which had become seemingly hopelessly deadlocked. Armenia occupies nearly 30% of Azerbaijan's territory in Nagorno-Karabakh and its surrounding districts. And senior officials that I spoke with in Baku told me that the occupation is at the heart of ongoing tensions.
When we last met, there seemed to be a sense of cautious optimism in terms of the peace talks with Armenia that have since stalled. What has changed since then?
Actually, Azerbaijan had some expectation. When Pashinyan came to power, Azerbaijan had expectation that Pashinyan most probably can pursue a different policy than the previous Armenian leadership. And also want to remind Dushanbe meeting of my president with Pashinyan. An Armenian prime minister asked that let's give some time. We can make a house cleaning in Armenia and prepare for the parliamentary elections and so on. And from Azerbaijan's perspective, we have provided constructive engagement in the negotiation process and given it time, and also tried from our side to ensure a ceasefire regime. But unfortunately, we haven't seen reciprocity. Armenian side and Armenian government continued their destructive policy. First, it starts from the offensive military doctrine of Armenia that calls for new territories and new wars, but also publicly disclosed by Armenian defense minister. Then Armenian security minister said that no inch of territory of Azerbaijan should be back. And then Pashinyan said that Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia and full stop.
On July 14th, a day after Azerbaijan took some of its heaviest casualties, losing a popular high-ranking general on the front line, thousands of protesters took to the streets in Baku, with some storming the parliament building. They called for a general war against Armenia and for the liberation of the Armenian-occupied Karabakh region. Dozens were arrested, and a number of opposition figures were also rounded up by state security. But as always, what happens in the South Caucasus will invariably involve other regional powers. The Russian army conducted a surprise major military exercise in its southern military district shortly after the Tovuz clashes. Armenia has a long-standing alliance with Russia.
We saw recently the Russian military holding a massive military exercise in the southwest part of the country, not far from Azerbaijan. Did that worry you?
Yes, we had some concerns, and we have openly communicated to our Russian partners. Russia is also a neighboring country, and in the midst of this escalation, there was an information that Russia starts intensive military exercise in the territory of Russia, and Armenian division also joined this process. But our defense minister had a talk with the Russian defense minister, and we get assurances once again that in no way these two events are related.
But despite the reassurances, reports surfaced that the Kremlin had, in the midst of the fighting, shipped hundreds of tons of weapons to Armenia via Iranian airspace. And in a rare rebuke, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev directly raised these weapons shipments in a phone call with Russia's Vladimir Putin. Turkey, a longtime strategic ally of Azerbaijan, responded with its own joint live-fire exercise with Azerbaijani military counterparts. The message to Armenia was unmistakable. Though Azerbaijan and Armenia technically signed a ceasefire agreement in 1994, fighting has broken out intermittently since then. And Azerbaijan's military leadership warned that more fighting might be in store ahead if the underlying causes driving tensions are not resolved.
Ancaq bir hərbiçi olaraq bizim vəzifəmiz, bizim funksiyamız müharibəyə hazır olmaqdır. Və Azərbaycan ordusu da istənilən halda münaqişənin hərbi yolla həll olunmasında iştirak edə bilər. 2016-cı ildə Azərbaycan ordusu münaqişənin hərbi yolla həll olunmasının bir qism hissəsini göstərdi. Ona görə də biz bir ordu olaraq müharibəyə hazırıq.
Azerbaijan has invested heavily in acquiring attack drones from Israel, and most recently signed a deal to acquire the Bayraktar drones from Turkey. The drones have had a notable effect on the battlefield.
Ali Baş Komandanın tapşırığına əsasən 2014-cü ildən başlayaraq Azərbaycan ordusundan geniş miqyaslı islahatlara start verilib. Xüsusilə şəxsi heyətin komplektləşdirilməsi məsələsi, xüsusilə ordunun modernizasiyası məsələsi, silahlanmaya ən yüksək dəqiqliyə malik silahların alınıb yerləşdirilməsi məsələsi. Erməni tərəfi itkilərinin çox az olduğunu desə də, amma bizim apardığımız çəkilişlər və əldə etdiyimiz əməliyyat məlumatları onu deməyə əsas verir ki, ölü və yaralı olaraq düşmən tərəfi yüzlərlə itki veribdir.
The geopolitics of the clashes have potentially far-reaching consequences. Control over billions of dollars of energy resources could be at stake. Winston Churchill once famously quipped, "If oil is a queen, Baku is her throne." And the recent fighting took place in the center of the strategic Ganja Gap. This trade corridor is only 100 kilometers wide and is where 3 major oil and gas pipelines flow tons of energy resources to the west while bypassing Russia and Iran. I sat down with Ilshad Nasirov, vice president of SOCAR, Azerbaijan's state energy company, to get a better idea of how global oil flows could be impacted due to the tensions with Armenia.
The situation is really serious because this is not only the situation of security of Azerbaijan, but this infrastructure is providing the energy security to Europe. If you look at the map of Eurasia from the Barents Sea in the north to the Persian Gulf in the south, the meridian that cuts Azerbaijan cuts only 3 countries: Russia to the north, Iran to the south, and Azerbaijan in the middle. So the only corridor which is capable to provide Caspian energy resources to the European Union is the route of Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey.
Mass displacement of millions of Azerbaijanis, forced out of their ancestral towns and villages in occupied Karabakh, is also a central issue in the divide between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Representatives of the Azerbaijani diaspora say that coexistence with Armenia is possible one day, but without a return to their lands, a long-term peace is not realistic.
The recent escalation along the state border between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the attempt of the Armenian armed forces to attack and to occupy more lands of Azerbaijan demonstrated one more time how fragile the situation is and the urgent issue that we have to deal and we have to resolve this conflict as soon as possible. Because enjoying this impunity for 3 decades, the Republic of Armenia still continues its occupation, keeping under occupation the Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan and surrounding districts. This time, escalation broke out not in the occupied territories of Azerbaijan, but around 130 kilometers away from the Nagorno-Karabakh region of Azerbaijan, which demonstrates that it was pre-planned attack of the armed forces of Armenia against Azerbaijan. We have high hopes that the day will come that we will go back to our native lands. We will restore the violated internationally recognized territories of Azerbaijan. We will restore our violated rights. These ceasefires are not meant to last forever. That's why it's very important for us to resolve this conflict as soon as possible. Otherwise, it will be a very heavy burden for the next generation.
The burden of history can be a heavy weight to bear. And tucked into the side streets of Baku's old city is a memorial to Azerbaijan's brief 2-year liberation in 1918 from Armenian Bolshevik forces.
And reminds in history. In 1918, when Azerbaijan Democratic Republic was established, Turkey stretches a brotherly hand to Azerbaijan to fight against Bolshevik and Dashnak troops who conducted massacre in Baku. And in 2018, as a symbolic act, after 100 years later, Azerbaijani Turkish armed forces marched through the streets of Baku with an old uniform and with a new uniform.
There can be no frozen conflict. A conflict is still a conflict unless it's fully resolved. Otherwise, it will explode.
And as we prepared to depart to Azerbaijan once again, I couldn't help but wonder how soon we would have to return to cover yet another outbreak of fighting. In this land of endless beauty, a conflict seemingly without end.